Okay, everybody, and welcome to the Business Shower Podcast, a podcast for business owners to shine. I am your girl, Kelly Edwards, and today we are talking with Howard Bloom, world-renowned publicist. That's what I'm going to say.
Well,
how are you doing today?
It's been a wonderful day, Kelly. The sun was shining. My 3.5 mile walk in the park was wonderful. I got to pet a dog, which, means that you get a dose of unconditional love before you start your work day. Yes. So it's been a great day. How's yours?
Everything is going good. Everything's going good. Winding down, getting ready for the new week.
Right.
Yep. So tell our listeners who you are and what you do.
That's a little hard to do. Okay. I'm the author of 7 books. Okay. The best known of them is called The Lucifer Principle, a scientific expedition into the forces of history. Mm-hmm. And we can go into the rest of them later. I appear on 545 radio stations every Wednesday night. There's a film about me called The Grand Unified Theory of Howard Bloom that's won 2 festival awards. There's another film about me coming called My Dinner with Howard Bloom, and that is being done by Buckminster Fuller's film biographer. And brace yourself. I should never say this out loud.
Okay.
But Channel 4 TV says I'm the Einstein, Darwin, Newton, and Freud of the 21st century. And Gear magazine says I may just be the next Stephen Hawking, except I'm not just interested in the physical world. I'm interested in the human spirit. So that's a little bit of who I am. I run 16 projects. Well, I normally run 15 projects simultaneously. Okay. And a 16th has just come up. And that's just a little bit beyond my limit. Okay. So I'm operating at my limits right now. And for this audience that's interested in business, mm-hmm. I'm the founder of 2 successful businesses. One was what became the leading commercial art studio on the East Coast. It was called Cloud Studio. The second one was the biggest PR firm in the music industry. And I worked with Michael Jackson, Prince, Bob Marley, Bette Midler, AC/DC, Aerosmith, Kiss, Queen, Run DMC, Billy Joel, Billy Idol, Paul Simon, Peter Gabriel, David Byrne, Kool and the Gang, Chaka Khan, people like that.
Okay. Listen,
and Kelly, I was the leading Black publicist in the music industry. Mm-hmm. Even though clearly my skin tone is closer to pink.
Mm-hmm. But that's a really good thing. I have to ask you, how was the experience with has to be my favorite, and that's Michael Jackson. Like how was that experience to work with him?
Well, I have a new book. It's called Einstein, Michael Jackson, and Me: A Search for Soul in the Power Pits of Rock and Roll. And it tries to get across to you who Michael really was. And the Michael Jackson community thinks that it does that more successfully than any other book out there. Mm-hmm. Michael, if you loved Michael, you knew him better than any newspaper headline you ever read. Mm-hmm. Because Michael Jackson was the closest thing to a saint, the closest thing to divinity that I have ever met on this planet. Talk about a pure soul. Michael had a quality of wonder, awe, and amazement that was so far beyond that of any other human I've ever worked with. And I've worked with Buzz Aldrin and the 11th president of India and all kinds of people like that. Mm-hmm. But Michael just transcended them by level after level after level after level. And he felt that because God had given him this astonishing ability to see the infinite in the tiniest of things, that it was his job to give that wonder, that level of wonder, awe, and surprise to his kids. Mm-hmm. And he was utterly committed to that. And I loved him for it. He's the most important person I've ever met in my life. And I don't mean that he's the most important person because of the degree of his celebrity. I mean that he's the most important person because of the depth and heights of his soul.
Yeah. Yeah, that's exactly why he's my favorite.
Exactly.
So, tell us your story and how it shaped you into who you are today.
Well, from a business point of view, let's get to the start. Mm-hmm. When I was 10 years old, nobody in my hometown of Buffalo, New York wanted to have anything to do with me. The other kids literally would pick up their bats and balls and move to another baseball field if they saw me coming and felt that they were going to be obligated to pick me for a team.
Wow.
My parents simply weren't interested in me and didn't have time. They were too busy. So here I was all alone, and I'd been alone since the age of 2, and a book. There was a book in my lap. And, you know, when you're sitting in your family living room, you know the location of every book your parents own because the location of those books never change. Your parents don't even pick them up to read them. They just stay there. And this is a book I'd never seen before. And it said the first 2 rules of science are these: the truth at any price, including the price of your life. And it gave the example of Galileo, and it told the story all wrong. It gave it as if Galileo was willing to go to the stake in order to defend his truth. That's not true, actually, but I didn't know that. I needed that heroic example. And it said the second rule of science is look at things right under your nose as if you've never seen them before, and then proceed from there. And it gave the example of Anton von Leeuwenhoek, the guy who invented the microscope. He looked down at pond water and he saw that it was filled with what he called animalcules, these little microscopic animals we'd been sharing the earth with ever since we became human and had never known existed before. So I went into theoretical physics and microbiology at the age of 10 and accumulated my first scientific credentials when I was 12. I built my first Boolean algebra machine. I co-designed a computer that won some science fair awards. I had a meeting with the head of the graduate physics department at the University of Buffalo, my hometown university, and it was probably supposed to be 5 minutes just to placate my mother. It turned into an hour because we were discussing the hottest scientific topic of the time, Big Bang versus steady state theory of the universe and the interpretation of the Doppler shift. And he walked out of his office and he put his hand on my shoulder and said to my mom, "You don't have to save for grad school for him. He'll get fellowships at any school he wants."
Exactly.
In theoretical physics. So then the question is, how in the world did I make it into the music industry?
Yeah.
And we'll fast forward. Let's give you another tiny little story. When I was 12 and in 8th grade, one day something that had never happened to me happened. And a girl in the class turned her eyes toward mine and made eye contact. That it had never happened to me before. And she said, "I told my mother you understand the theory of relativity." Now, Kelly, I didn't understand the theory of relativity, even though I was deeply steeped in science. But I wasn't going to confess to that because the only thing I had going for me is that the other kids who had nothing to do with me in general called me the sickly scientist. So I hopped on my bicycle as soon as school was over. I pedaled down to the library where the librarians literally knew me better than my mother did, and said, "Give me everything you've got on relativity." They gave me a big fat book by Einstein and 2 collaborators and a little skinny book by Einstein himself. I pedaled home with those books, went up to my bedroom and started reading the big fat book because I had learned at that point that if you do things the hard way, not the easy way, you get more out of it.
Yeah.
If you finish a book that you don't think you understood, by the time you finish, you've understood something. And so I was 50 pages into the great big fat book, which is all equations, and I don't understand equations. I never have. And when 8 o'clock rolled around, I had a sudden realization. I have only 2 hours in which to understand the theory of relativity. At 10 o'clock, my mom is going to put me to sleep. And if I show up the next day in class without understanding it, I'm fried. I'm cooked. So I turned to the little skinny book. And in the little skinny book, it felt as if Albert Einstein had reached his hand out through the page and grabbed me by the front of my shirt and put his nose up to mine and said, "Schmuck, listen up. To be a genius, it's not enough to come up with a theory only 7 men in the world can understand. To be a genius, you have to be able to come up with that theory and then express it so clearly that anyone with a high school education and a reasonable degree of intelligence can understand it." So Albert Einstein, through the pages of a book, told me right up front, to be an original scientific thinker, you have to be a writer. And you have to be not just any old writer, you have to be a really good writer, a writer who can write dessert trays for the intellect, whose every sentence can be a pastry. So fast forward many years to NYU. So I was at NYU, like you. I was majoring in psychology and minoring in English literature because I had already accumulated even more scientific credentials than I've just told you about by then. So I took my science for granted. What I really wanted to concentrate on was my writing because of Albert Einstein. And I thought that if I took English literature, my professors would stand over me with a whip and make me write, which unfortunately didn't turn out to be true. But in my junior year, and I took poetry very, very seriously. It played a very important part of my life. So one year, my junior year, I was in poetry class with the poet in residence at NYU. And he said, look, Bloom, wait until everybody leaves the room, close the door, sit there. I need to talk to you. And Kelly, this did not sound good. Not at all.
I hate when people say, I need to talk to you. It's almost like, what did I do?
Yes, exactly. So I waited until everybody left. I closed the door. I sat in the bowling out seat. And he said, look, you, last year I asked you to be on the staff of the literary magazine. You never even showed up. This year, I'm telling you, you are the literary magazine. You are the editor. You don't even have a faculty advisor. Once you walk out that door, you're it. Now walk out that door. So I walked out the door looking extremely confused, and another kid saw, because look, literary magazines to me were the most boring things on planet Earth. They have these pale eggshell blue covers. They have horrible typefaces on the cover.
Yes.
If there's a rip-roaring orgy, and you throw a literary magazine into the room, you can empty the room in 5 minutes. It is so boring.
Yeah. Yes.
Contagiously boring. So that's why I was in this real profound quandary. And a kid walked up to me and said, you look like you're having difficulty with something. Can I help you? And I said, yes, I've just been named the editor of a literary magazine. And he said, why don't we go for a cup of coffee? Now, Kelly, I did not grow up among human beings. I had lab rats and guinea pigs and guppies in my bedroom. Other kids, as I said, wanted to have nothing to do with me. So I didn't know basic human rituals, like what does have a cup of coffee mean? But I meekly followed him down the stairs and a few doors down to a coffee shop. And he ordered a cup of coffee and I ordered a glass of water. And he asked me one of the most important questions I've ever been asked in my life. If you could do anything you wanted with this magazine, what would it be? And I said, it would be a picture book. So I gathered two staffs. I gathered a literary staff and I gathered a graphics staff, a bunch of artists. And the magazine was a smash. We printed it 12 by 12 inches because it was called the Washington Square Review. So it was square, like an album cover. And we had 4-color printing and we had extraordinary paper. And it was a smash. So I was called in for a meeting with the Student Activities Committee. You know, Kelly, I didn't know there was a Student Activities Committee. I'd never heard of it before. So I went to this meeting and they praised the magazine to the ceiling and they doubled my budget for the second issue. So this is how I got in with a bunch of artists. By the way, the second issue was, I was turning it into a sex and death issue. And when my literary staff got wind of the direction I was taking, half of them quit. And when the magazine came out, it was in 5-color printing, the usual 4 colors plus silver. And it was drop dead gorgeous, but unlike anything you'd ever seen before, ever. And so the result was nobody on campus would talk to me. The poet in residence avoided me. And I got calls from the art directors of Look magazine, which was this gorgeous bi-weekly full-color news magazine, one of the biggest magazines in America at the time, and the Evergreen Review, which was the biggest bohemian magazine in the country for hippies, and Boy's Life, the Boy Scout magazine, a great big gorgeous full-color magazine for Boy Scouts. All of them wanted to have meetings. All of them had been absolutely struck with the quality of what we had done. So I graduated, magna cum laude, Phi Beta Kappa, and sure enough, just as the head of the graduate physics department at University of Buffalo had said, I had 4 graduate fellowships. But it was in a field that didn't have a name yet. I was going to have to paste the program together myself. Today it's called neuroscience.
Okay.
And at the beginning of the summer, I walked into the home, the apartment of the most extraordinary of all the artists that I'd gathered, and discovered that the artist, his wife, and his 3-year-old were all on the floor crying. Meanwhile, they were on a wall-to-wall carpet, but there was no furniture in the room. And I asked them, what's the matter? And they said, well, we don't have any money. We haven't been able to pay any of our bills. Our electricity is being cut off. Our telephone is being cut off. Our furniture has been repossessed, and we're being evicted from our apartment. And I said, what? Your work is freaking brilliant. If anyone who sees it is going to give you a job. Exactly. And if they give you a job, you'll be able to pay your rent. Yeah. So get your portfolio together and let me take it out for 2 weeks because I haven't found a summer job yet. And I'll get you enough work to pay your rent. Okay. And the artist said, well, if you're going to take out my portfolio, I want you to take out the portfolio of my best friend because we moved down here from Boston to start an art studio. Kelly, the best friend's work was nauseating. It was just terrible. But I said, yes, I needed to save this guy from being homeless. Yeah. And I started to take the work out. And by the end of the summer, I hadn't sold anything. I had gotten New York Magazine interested in doing a feature on the studio, but I hadn't sold anything. And I had a sudden realization. Since I was 12 years old, I had been fascinated by the ecstatic experience. So that started when I was 12. When I was 15, a film came out called Black Orpheus. And it was about Macumba rituals in South America. And I resonated to those rituals, absolutely resonated to them. And so to me, the most interesting thing to study as a scientist was what I called the gods inside of us. Because if you're in a Macumba ritual or a voodoo ritual or a North American Holy Roller Church ritual, you are waiting for the moment when God takes you over, when you are filled with Christ. And if you are sufficiently filled with Christ, James Baldwin described this experience brilliantly in Go Tell It on the Mountain. You can be foaming at the mouth and writhing on the floor for 3 hours in the grip of the God inside of you. And those gods inside of you were what I really wanted to study with my science. And when the end of the summer came, I had 2 things happen. I realized that if I went to grad school, I'd be giving paper and pencil tests to 22 college students for the rest of my life in exchange for a psychology credit. And how many gods was I going to see come to life? Yeah, exactly. None. But if I stayed in this art thing, I was in a periscope position to look around in the dark underbelly where new myths and movements are made, where the gods come alive. Yeah. So I called Columbia University and told them I wouldn't be coming. I'd be coming the next year. Okay. And I stuck with the art studio thing. And we built that studio to being, as I said, the most prominent avant-garde art studio on the East Coast. So what business advice in the world can you derive from this experience? First of all, if you love what you're doing, it makes all the difference in the world. If you believe in what you're doing, if you believe it right down to the fundamental roots of your soul, you can succeed. Second, you need absolute persistence. My routine for this business, I'd spend the first half of the day going through things like the yellow pages, something that doesn't really exist anymore. Looking
online,
for every,
it does.
Yeah, exactly. But I'd be looking for every kind of business I could find that might want the artwork of my artists. And the second half of the day, I spent going out. I spent the morning making appointments on the phone, and I spent the afternoon having those appointments. Wow. So I would meet with 5 art directors a day, 25 art directors a week. God knows whether that is a month, 125 or something ridiculous like that. Yeah. So 100. It's roughly a little more than 100 people a month. And it took a year of doing this before we really started to establish ourselves.
Wow.
But eventually, I invented a new animation technique for NBC TV. We did all of the advertising graphics for ABC's 7 FM stations at a time when they were going through a radical transition, trying something that had been bandied about or invented on the campus of Bard College by a little group of hippies. It was called progressive radio or album radio, and ABC was going to gamble everything, 7 stations, on this format that nobody had ever tried yet. And we did all of the advertising graphics for them, and they wanted me, they asked me to form an advertising agency to handle all of their advertising. And I didn't want to, because I didn't want to learn time buying. It sounded boring. And meantime, the head of marketing, every time I went up to ABC 7 FM stations, to their headquarters, she schooled me a little bit more every single visit on this thing I knew nothing about called rock and roll, popular music. And because I listened to Beethoven, Bartok, Rachmaninoff, people like that, because popular music was the music of the kids who used to beat me up. So up until then, I'd wanted to have nothing to do with it. And one day, she said, look, I've got tickets to this. We're doing a concert in Studio B, a live concert. I've got 2 tickets. Would you like them? Would you come if I gave them to you? And I said, yes, sure. So I took my artist, the one who had been about to be thrown out of his apartment, with me. And there was a piano player on stage. And my artist made me so embarrassed. It was ridiculous. He stood on his feet the whole concert, whooping, hollering, yipping, whistling. And Kelly, I had been a performer when I was 16 years old. And I should have known that the energy you get from the audience is the energy you give back to the audience.
Yeah.
And it's a continuous feedback loop. The more you get energy from the audience, the more you feed back to them.
Exactly.
And so what I didn't realize is that Peter Bramley, my artist, was not just embarrassing the hell out of me. He was making the quality of that concert by feeding energy to the guy on stage. And the guy on stage was a piano player named Elton John. And this live concert, you can get it. You know, it's an album today. It's a classic album.
Wow.
So, but back to the lessons, absolute persistence. Remember those 25 visits a week. Those mornings spent just researching every site I could possibly find to figure out who might be receptive to our art, including going to things that sound terribly unlikely, that sound like they have no chance. Because often, strange as it sounds, your clients come from the places you least expect, the places you thought would not produce any results whatsoever.
Absolutely.
So those are the lessons. Work at it with all your heart and persist. And then, okay, remember the incompetent artist?
Yes.
Okay. Well, there was a guy named Eddie Simmons.
Okay.
And he had invented something new for American Express called the credit card. And he'd made a ton of money. And he wanted to become a publisher. So he bought a girls' magazine called Ingenue, but he had his sights on higher things than that. Meanwhile, whenever I went to visit him, he treated me as if he were my father. He was just amazingly good to me. And there was this magazine that came out of Boston, out of Harvard University, that appeared once a year, and it went on sale on newsstands all over the country, and it sold out in 2 hours. And so Maddie flew up to Boston, met with the guys who were putting together that year's issue of this magazine, and made them an offer they couldn't refuse. He said, if you put this magazine out on a monthly basis, I'll put you up in extraordinary apartments in New York City. I'll give you extraordinary amounts of money. You can be high flyers with high prestige in the Big Apple. Just give me this magazine once a month. And the magazine was called The Lampoon at Harvard. So the the monthly magazine was called the National Lampoon. And Maddie said, I want you to art direct this. I want your studio to art direct this. Well, the incompetent artist, as soon as we landed that gig, which meant a huge amount of money every month, a guaranteed income every month, took the other artists aside and said, look, why do we need Howard? Why should we be divvying up the money and giving him his share? If we get rid of Howard, if we throw him out of the studio, we can take his part of the money and divide it up among ourselves. But actually, he was out for something bigger than the money.
Yeah.
He was out to become the art director of the National Lampoon. And remember, he was nauseatingly bad. Nauseatingly bad. So he turned out 7 issues of the National Lampoon that were nauseatingly bad, and then they fired Cloud Studio. Meanwhile, I was adrift. And because of Einstein's imperative, I had wanted to write for magazines. And I had a whiff of interest at Esquire for a while on an article on sex and drugs among teenagers in the suburbs of America, which I researched like crazy for 2 months by going out to Meriden, Connecticut with notepad in hand and a tape recorder and interviewing kids like crazy. And discovering that the sexual revolution and the drug revolution that I had helped usher in as one of the accidental founders of the hippie movement was now taking hold among 12-year-olds and 11-year-olds who were having sexual adventures at that age. I was shocked and having drug adventures at that age. But one day, curing Cloud Studios' portfolio, I made an appointment with a new underground fashion magazine bankrolled by Baron Woolman, who had bankrolled Rolling Stone. And I went to the garment district, which is not where most of my potential clients were located, and took the ride up in a freight elevator because it was an industrial building. The only elevator was the freight elevator, and got out of the freight elevator. There were 3 women in the room, and I expected to put my portfolio on a table and have them ooh and ah as they saw the pictures in the portfolio. I didn't get that far. I took one step out of the elevator, and these 3 women's jaws dropped. I had been co-designing my clothes with a designer who was 4 blocks away from my art studio on the Lower East Side, the East Village. Okay. And so I walked in with one of her outfits with my accoutrements on it. And these women's jaws dropped. And they said, pointing at my clothes, do you have more of these? And I said, yes, I've got a whole closet full of them. Why? And they said, do you think you could write an article about this? Kelly, I had been looking for an opportunity to write for magazines.
I was just going to say.
Right. And here one dropped into my lap. So eventually, I wrote 175 articles and became a contributing editor for this magazine. And then another contributing editor to Rags founded a magazine called Natural Lifestyles. And she said, I want you to be a contributing editor to Natural Lifestyle. So now I was a contributing editor to 2 magazines. And I was building the studio while all of this was going on. So that meant I got up naked in the morning at 6 o'clock, went without any clothes on to a manual Remington office typewriter from the 1940s. And pushing its keys was so hard, you practically had to use a sledgehammer to do it.
Wait a minute. So this was all done on a typewriter?
Yeah, this was all done on a typewriter.
Wow, this is so... Yeah. Okay, go ahead. I'm sorry.
And the buttons were almost impossible to push. As I said, you needed a sledgehammer to hit each one. So I was sitting there naked for 2 hours, writing like crazy. And then I'd put on my Susan Harris co-designed outfits and would go into the art studio and put in the kind of work day that I described to you, working my ass off. And then I would come home and sit at the typewriter again for another 2 hours to write all these articles. And it was becoming a little exhausting. So they kicked me out of the art studio. And one day I was covering a parapsychology conference, mind readers, spoon benders, people like that, for Natural Lifestyles. And a kid walked up to me, seeing the pad in my hand, because my pad was as much a part of my body, my pad and pen, as my fingers and the palm of my hand. And he gathered that I was a writer. And he said, would you like to edit a magazine? And I thought, wow, here I've just been thrown into my art studio. I'm trying to start another one. Because half the artists left with me, Kelly. Half the artists were not happy with this new arrangement at Cloud Studio.
I was just gonna say.
So, and the artists suffered for throwing me out because once they lost the National Lampoon, they just didn't get any more work. And one of them, the best of them, the most talented one, the one who had been doing all the yipping and hollering at the Elton John concert, died of alcoholism in his 40s. So these people made a big mistake, but they did set me free, which was very important for me. And so a kid walked up and said, "Do you want to edit a magazine?" I thought, wow, if I edit a magazine, I can do my writing during the day and don't have to get up at 6 o'clock in the morning. So I said yes. And he gave me an appointment. And he gave me the name of the person and the address of the person I was going to be meeting with. And that's all I had, because Kelly, we didn't have Google in those days.
No.
And there was no way to look up a random name in those days. So I went to this meeting not knowing what the magazine editor, what the magazine was. And he told me it was called Circus. And I thought, well, what I've learned from the writing that I've done so far, because I've written for the Boy Scouts, despite the fact that I've been thrown out of the Boy Scouts for incompetence at Morse code at the age of 11.
Wow.
I mean, have you ever heard of anybody being thrown out of the Boy Scouts?
No.
Me neither, except me. So I'd written their handbooks on stalking and tracking and camouflage. And I felt if I love my audience, I can write about anything. And if I've got enough research material. And it turned out the magazine was not about clowns and elephants. It was about rock and roll. And so that's how I got into the rock and roll business. And even though I did not found this magazine, there are business lessons to be learned from what I did at the magazine. The publisher, I'd put in a really exhausting day. I worked in a windowless closet that had been converted into an office space.
Okay.
It was horrible. I mean, I love windows. But I cranked out the magazine. And the publisher, when I finished at 6 o'clock, would have me come over to his office, which had 7 windows overlooking whatever river is on the east side of Manhattan. And so you could see a ship coming from 2 miles upstream, and you could see it go 2 miles downstream on its way to the ocean. So I would sit with him in this magnificent office as the twilight was descending, and he would explain to me that there were 2 magazines in Europe, Bravo and Salut les Copains. One in Germany, one in France. And they sold 1 million copies each to teenagers. And he wanted to know, and they were markets, each of those was a market a fifth the size of the United States, which means if a magazine in the United States had sold an equal, whatever it is, number of magazines, it would have sold 5 million magazines. And yet the highest selling magazine in the music industry in the United States was Rolling Stone. And it only sold 250,000 copies, nowhere near that 5 million potential.
Wow.
Plus, he loved the way the Time magazine read. And he wanted me, if I could, to give him the equivalent of Bravo and Salut les Copains in a style that read like Time magazine. And I took that very seriously, and I dissected those magazines as if they were frogs. I did it at night. I did it on the weekends while I was turning out the magazine every month. By the way, he hired me to replace 2 people. So I was doing the job that 2 people had done, before me. And at the end of about 10 months, I came to him and I said, okay, I've analyzed these magazines. I had grown up on Time magazine. My best friend and I always tied for first place in the Time magazine current events quiz. I mean, we knew that magazine upside down, backwards, and forwards, but analyzing it was a whole new opportunity to get to know its secrets. So I came to my publisher and I said, look, if you give me sales figures, so I can run correlational studies, the stuff from my science, I guarantee I will give you a magazine that will increase in sales. Now, I've only made statements like that about 5 times in my life. And I do it when I have a vision, literally a vision. And I can see, yes, this is going to happen if we do the following things. So he was very reluctant. He'd never turned over sales figures before, but he gave me the sales figures. I did the correlational studies. And I came back to him with a formula. And bless his soul, he said yes to the formula, even though it broke every single rule that he had established for the magazine in the past. And over the course of the next 12 months, we increased in sales by 211%.
Wow.
Can you imagine that in 12 months? And he went from having a modest apartment on 2nd Avenue or on 63rd Street to having a totally immodest apartment the size of an aircraft hangar, overlooking the river again.
Wow.
So the what is the lesson from this? If you truly love your audience, if you truly love your potential customer base, if you take your empathy and you put yourself in their skins so you can feel the way they feel, and if you follow your own hidden desires, if you look for the current of your own desires, they will help inform you about how your audience feels if you attune that empathic self to their frequency. You know, we have these things called mirror neurons, and mirror neurons allow us to empath other people, to see what they're doing and to anticipate what their next move is going to be, or how their current move is going to play out, or how their long-term future is going to go. You have to use those empathic powers. They are not telepathy. Those are real world powers. You have to be your audience to the best of your ability. You have to use management by walking outside. Remember, by the time I got to this magazine, Circus Magazine, I had spent 2 months in the suburbs of Connecticut with kids, with suburban white kids who turned out to be Circus's audience. And so live in the skin of your customers. Love your customers. Use your own internal passions, your own unfilled needs, your own irritations to sense the commercial possibilities. Every irritation is a commercial possibility in disguise, because if you come up with a solution to that irritation that wipes it out, hey, you are a secular savior for humankind. So I wrote a book about this. It's called The Genius of the Beast, a radical revision of capitalism. And the Office of the Secretary of Defense threw a forum. No, it threw a forum based on a different book. No, the 11th president of India read this book and said it was a visionary creation. And the head of the sheik who runs Dubai named a racehorse after this book. And his former minister of development, who runs Dubai's sovereign real estate operation, a $33 billion company, and among other things, built the tallest building in the world, and has holdings in 15 different countries. He went in front of a group he'd co-founded, the Arabian Business and Economic Forum, and said, there is a book I particularly resonate to. It contains the future of Dubai, and proceeded to read passages from this book, The Genius of the Beast, a radical revision of capitalism, to the assembled Arab leaders. And I'm Jewish and I'm a Zionist. So you would think there's no way that they would accept me, much less use me as a guide for the development of a city, a nation. But I've been very fortunate. The Islamic world has embraced me, and it embraced me much more than the Western world did at certain points. So love your customers. And look at the things that you need. I mean, really need. The things that you need that hit you with emotional smack. And pursue those things. And again, persistence, working your frigging ass off day after day after day. I worked 7 days a week in order to edit Circus and simultaneously carry out the homework assignment of figuring out these other publications and their secrets. So those are the secrets. And then when I left Circus, I was scooped up by Gulf and Western, one of, at that point, the biggest conglomerate in the world, because they distributed 14 record companies. And they wanted me to create a public and artist relations department for them. And I did. And the result of it was very strange, Kelly,
Mhm.
because the company was not making money, far from it.
Okay.
And the result was that everybody else around me was losing budgets.
Mhm.
But whenever I wanted to add an additional person to my staff, the budget was miraculously there.
Yeah.
So I expanded my staff to 5 people.
Okay.
Doesn't sound like a lot, but in a company that's getting rid of people,
Exactly.
yeah, and it
That is
started
a
with
lot.
and it started with just me.
Mhm.
That's 5 times as many as they started with. And then eventually Gulf and Western sold its record holdings
Mhm.
to ABC Records.
Mhm.
And the lawyer who negotiated the deal called me. Now, Kelly, I had no idea of why the lawyer would be calling me. I didn't deal with lawyers. I didn't
Yeah.
deal on that level. I didn't deal on the level of negotiating deals.
Wow.
And he said, listen to me. The reason ABC, that Gulf and Western was able to get such a large amount of money out of ABC Records for this shit-ass little company
Mhm.
was because of you.
Mm.
And I said, no, I'm sorry. That's impossible. I just stay in my own territory and do my job. I know nothing about the business end of things. I couldn't care less about the money end of things. So it's not me.
Yeah.
It can't be me. And he said, no, listen to me. You focused on Dot Records, which was the number 3 country and Western label and was trying to be number 1. You doubled the value of that company. You focused on Sire Records. Sire Records was the record company of Seymour Stein, the guy who would later discover Madonna. You focused on that company and you doubled its value.
Wow.
So you were the reason we were able to sell that company for so much money.
Mhm.
And again, what were the secrets? Absolute persistence, following your passions, loving your audience, putting yourself in the skin of your audience members.
Yeah.
And all of a sudden, okay, a vice president from ABC flew into New York and gathered all of the staff of Gulf and Western's record operations. We had never seen each other in one room before, ever.
Mhm.
There were 57 of us. And said, go on about your business as usual. There will be no blood flowing in the corridors of this company.
Mhm.
And Kelly, I knew that meant trouble.
Yeah.
That there would be blood flowing in the corridors of the company. So I stopped everything we were working on and put my staff to work on researching how many inches of space we had gotten in print publications, how many minutes we had gotten on the radio, how many minutes we had gotten on television, and going to standard rate and data and figuring out exactly how much it would have cost the company to buy all of this exposure as advertising.
Mhm.
And we discovered something really weird. For every dollar that Gulf and Western had spent on my department, it had gotten $11 worth of exposure.
Wow.
Well, it was the middle of winter when all of this happened. And people normally take cabs by themselves, just one passenger per cab or one passenger and his friends. But in the middle of winter, the rules change in New York City, and sometimes you double up.
Yeah.
So when I got a cab home, the driver said, I need to pick up another passenger. Do you mind? Well, of course I didn't. We help each other out in New York when there's a major blizzard. And he picked up an executive from Young and Rubicam, one of the biggest advertising agencies in the business. And I told the advertising executive what we had just discovered, that for every dollar you put into my department, you got $11 back. And he said, no, you're wrong. And I thought, oh my God, we've overcalculated. It's $5. It's no dollars. What is it? What's the terrible news? And he said, no, you have to realize that in the advertising business, we count every inch of editorial space as worth 5 times as much as an inch of advertising.
Oh, wow.
Why? Because it has 5 times the credibility of that advertising space. So you didn't bring back $11 for every dollar that Gulf and Western spent. You brought back $55.
I was just about to say. Wow.
So 2 weeks later, everybody in the company received a pink slip, firing notice, with the exception of one. And that one person was me. Now, look, I had replaced 2 people at Circus
Mm-hmm.
and more than doubled the magazine in circulation. When I left, they had to hire 5 people to replace me.
Wow.
Can you imagine that? And I never wanted to have to do that again. I always wanted to be surrounded by an organization, to be able to build an organization.
Yeah.
So we would have a team instead of just me. And they fired my team. They fired all of my staff. So I turned in a resignation notice.
Mm-hmm.
And the executive who had flown in and made the no blood in the corridor speech flew back into New York, came to my office,
Mm-hmm.
said, take out a blank piece of paper. So I did. Put it on your desk. Write the names of the people you want to keep. Write down the salary, put your name at the top, write down the salary you want for you, and write down the salaries you want for your staff members.
Yeah.
So I did, and I gave us all a 20% raise.
That's so amazing.
Yes. And suddenly I was the head of public and artist relations for the East Coast for ABC Records. And then one day, because we must be coming toward the end of our time. But
no, just keep going.
Okay. So one day I got the word that, well, first of all, when I entered the company, we had something at ABC that I'd never seen before in my time in the record industry. We had a number 3 hit.
Oh.
A hit in the top 5 on the pop charts. And under Gulf and Western, we'd never had a hit like that. So I got all excited.
Mm-hmm.
And I discovered that the West Coast PR staff wasn't the least bit excited.
Mm.
Why? Because the lead singer was black.
Mm.
And it was not fashionable, if you can imagine this, considering that black music is the root of popular music
Mm-hmm.
in North America.
Mm-hmm.
It was not hip to work with a black artist, so all of them turned up their noses and turned their backs. And I got all excited. So I discovered that the manager for the band
Mm-hmm.
was about to come into New York.
Okay.
His wife was Diana Ross.
Mm.
He was Tracy Ellis Ross's dad.
Mm-hmm.
And since I was the head of artist relations, it was my job to show you that we cared about you.
Yeah.
So I went out to pick him up in a limousine, but I had something more insidious in mind than just making him feel that the company loved him.
Mm-hmm.
I knew that we would be baked in traffic
Yeah.
trying to come back to Manhattan.
Mm-hmm.
And that would mean he would be alone with me in this little capsule of an automobile. And I would be able to evangelize him. And I said, look, I know your band prides itself on its democracy.
Mm-hmm.
It prides itself on the fact that every member is equal to every other member.
Yeah.
But if you let me focus on just the lead singer and you cover my ass with the band, I guarantee you I will give you a star. Again, this is one of my 5 visions in life. I absolutely knew this.
Okay.
So he did.
Mm-hmm.
He let me pull the lead singer out and focus all of the attention on her. And her name was Chaka Khan. So again, what's the secret? The secret is passion, follow your instincts.
Mm-hmm.
I had been taught by 2 friends in the record industry who were workaholics the way that I am. Every Monday morning when the trade magazines come out, there were 3 of them in those days, read every single one of them from cover to cover. It's your homework for the week. It's your basis from which you will operate for the week. Plus, I had a headphone radio, the very first that Sony produced, and it had these antennae that stuck out, made you look like a Martian.
Yes.
And I listened faithfully to Casey Kasem's American Top 40. I recorded Casey Kasem's American Top 40. I listened to it until I could tell every song from the first note. And I knew the charts upside down. My friend Kurt Lassen, a journalist, used to like to go to lunch with me so he could say, where did Jethro Tull's album peak on the charts? He would just send me through a list of things, and I could always tell him where each artist had peaked on the charts and what that meant.
Wow.
So I call this saturated intuition. Saturate yourself in your business.
Mm-hmm.
Become the greatest, most knowledgeable person about that business has ever seen. and then use your instincts, use your emotions, use your empathic abilities, tune yourself to your audience. And you will succeed if you are on the path of the good, the path of the good, the true, and the beautiful.
Exactly.
You will succeed.
Wow.
But you have to work your frigging tail off.
Wow.
And be utterly committed to your audience.
I feel like the only thing I can say is just, wow.
And so we haven't even gotten to where I started my own business that was all my own, the Power Bloom Organization Ltd, which became the biggest PR firm in the music industry.
Yes. So let's talk about that for a second.
Well, okay. So one day I'm sitting in my cubicle at ABC, and Seymour Stein, the president of Sire Records, the guy who got me the job with Gulf and Western, Seymour walked past my office and he stuck his head in and he said, "Schmuck, if you're so smart, why don't you have your own company?" And that hurt, Kelly.
Yeah, I know.
Because the only thing I've got going for me is my smarts. I can't catch a baseball. I can't do any sport on planet Earth at all. The only thing I've got going for me is my brain. So if you challenge me on my smarts, you've really hit me in the gut. So I started to think about that, and then ABC was sold. It's a long story, but we were in a skyscraper in 56th Street and 6th Avenue, and we were on the 10th floor. And I would get calls from the 32nd floor, where the top executives were. And one of the top executives running the whole ABC empire wanted to talk to me periodically. And I would explain to him what my correlational studies and gut had shown about how you develop an artist who will sell albums and will make you money. And it has everything to do with gut and with total commitment to your audience. And despite all the stuff that he called me upstairs for me to reveal to him, he came to a bizarre conclusion. CBS Records and Warner Brothers Records each own 33% of the record industry. And he was curious about why. So was I. I had been tracking that for a long time. And this remarkable thing had happened at CBS. CBS had this genius named, is that your alarm?
No. It was
okay. So CBS had this genius record company president, Clive Davis. And Clive Davis was a former attorney. So the guy way up on the 32nd floor had come to the conclusion that the secret to having a successful record company was giving the presidency of the company to an attorney. How stupid is that? ABC removed its president, a president who was one of those old going by the gut presidents, an old style record guy, but a very effective one, and who I loved and who was very good to me. And he replaced him with an attorney. And the attorney hired, first of all, the attorney got $20 million to come into the company or something like that. He wrote himself the very first golden parachute deal that I had ever seen, that if they fired him, he'd get $20 million. And he got rid of everybody in the company, including me, and replaced them with his own staff. And the result was he killed ABC Records within a year. There was no such thing as ABC Records anymore. Not at all. Because of a really bad business decision from somebody who should have known better. So what's the moral to that story? It's watch out for stupidity. It's know your business upside down, backwards, and forwards. The guy who made this decision didn't know the business well enough to understand, because what made Clive Davis such a successful record company president? He had a golden ear. He could hear hits, and he knew how to produce hits, how to take a song and get the right producer and do the right orchestration and make a hit. That unfortunately he didn't know how to build an artist, but he did know how what songs were hits.
Yeah.
And that was the essential nature of Clive Davis that the guy at ABC totally missed.
Yeah.
So the basic lessons in all of this, so I told you who I would work with, legends. And remember, I had chosen not to go to grad school because I was in pursuit of the gods inside.
Yes.
And I was trying to tunnel into the dark underbelly where new myths and movements are made. And the artists that I worked with, people like Michael Jackson and Prince, were new myths in the making.
Yes.
And Kelly, I got the incredible opportunity to help make them myths. And in my book, Einstein, Michael Jackson, and Me, I am still trying to make Michael a myth. Why? Because he was a mythic figure. Because if we miss what he was at his core, we are missing one of the greatest opportunities in modern history to expand the range of human perception and to expand the envelope of human possibility. Because that's what Michael was about. In the book, I tell you, at once upon a time, in 1954, any sports physiologist you talk to would tell you that it is humanly impossible for humans to break the 4-minute mile, to run a mile in less than 4 minutes. And a guy, a medical student in England named Roger Bannister and his best friend got together. They analyzed every move he made when he was running and got rid of every energy wasting move. And finally, Roger Bannister broke the 4-minute mile. And once he broke it, other people started breaking it. And now, if you look up the 4-minute mile on Wikipedia, it tells you that every world-class runner automatically breaks the 4-minute mile. 1,800 people have broken the 4-minute mile. Well, Roger Bannister expanded the envelope of human possibility. If we understand Michael Jackson, if we can feel him in our gut, he has the capacity to expand the envelope of human possibility and the envelope of human perception, the envelope of human awe, wonder, and surprise. And this book attempts to show you who he really was, the Michael Jackson that we've all missed because of the celebrity game. So what business did I eventually go into? Finding human souls, nurturing those souls, finding people with mythic potential, and building those people into icons. And what is an icon? If I build you into an icon, but first it has to start with you having the capacity for that to begin with, and deserving it in a sense. And if you deserve it, kids will put your picture on their wall when they're 11 and a half and 12 and a half years old and going through one of the most difficult transitions humans ever undergo. The transition from childhood to sexuality, which is confusing as all hell.
It is.
And you will become, do you know what a trellis is?
No, not really.
It's this framework you use for tomato plants, because if you leave tomato plants alone, they'll just grow out along the ground and the tomatoes will rot. But if you put a trellis there, the tomato plant will grow up the ladder of the trellis. And so if you and I make you an icon, you will become a trellis on which kids will grow. And kids will never let go of you. They will never let go of you. So I used to tell my artists, you don't just owe your audience your songs. You owe your audience your life. Because your life will become a pattern on which other people will fashion their lives. And if you are an expander of the realm of human possibility, you will expand that envelope of what humans are capable of achieving. So according to, this book has been named Einstein, Michael Jackson, and Me, has been named the best book of 2020 by the New York Weekly Times and the LA Weekly Times. It has been named 2020's most soulful book on planet Earth by the Hollywood Digest. But most important is the way that Michael Jackson fans received, because I don't know if you know that community, but they know every detail of Michael's life. Every detail.
I grew up around that community, so yes, I know exactly. They do.
Right.
They know everything.
So for them to say that this is the ultimate book explaining who Michael Jackson is, not explaining, I try to put Michael in your gut. I try to put Michael in your heart. I try to put you inside his gut and his heart.
Wow.
And for them to say that the book succeeds in that is like the ultimate compliment on earth.
Yeah. I have two more questions before we go.
Okay.
All right. So, who influenced you?
Well, that's a good question. Albert Einstein obviously influenced me.
Okay.
Look at how powerfully he influenced me.
Mm-hmm.
Galileo and Anton von Leeuwenhoek, because those two guys saved me when I was 10 years old and they had been dead for 350 years,
Yeah.
they gave me a mission, Kelly.
Okay.
And that mission is to reach out over the next 350 years and save the next confused, lost child along the line. And that has been the mission I've been working toward my whole life. So those are the primary guys who have influenced me.
Okay. Awesome. And my second question, what would you say to someone who wants to pursue a similar career as yours?
Wow. Start getting to know the industry, the record industry, the music industry. Look at the charts every single week. Look into every artist who you do not know. Look into even the artists you think that you do know. Try to analyze, figure out how those artists built their careers. And be obsessive.
Yeah.
Be obsessive compulsive about it. Dedicate all your heart and soul to it. Look at every publication that covers, every media form that covers music. Figure out how in the world those publicists must have gotten those artists to the point where they're in these publications.
Yeah.
If you get a chance, intern in an office in the music industry. Yeah. And if your high school will allow it, try to intern while you're in high school. Because if you spend 4 years in these offices doing summer internships or whatever you do, you will know the vocabulary, you will know the names of the people in the industry, and you will have an opportunity to analyze and constantly analyze what makes success. What are the basic elements that make for success? That's how you get saturated intuition. That's how you saturate yourself with verbal knowledge so that your nonverbal self and your gut can gain a field that will allow you to say, if you cover my ass, I will give you a superstar.
Yeah.
In the case of a Chaka Khan, who at that point was utterly and completely unknown.
Yeah, she was. But look at her now.
Yes, right.
So one more question. You said that when you first started out, you would make phone calls in the morning and appointments in the afternoon. So my question to you is, how did you stay motivated during those times where maybe you didn't have any appointments set up in the afternoon, or you were calling and no one was picking up the phone? So how did you manage to be able to keep going at that, like when you didn't get exactly what you wanted?
Well, that's something, where your persistence comes from, God alone knows.
Okay.
But I'm lucky to be a workaholic and a fairly obsessive compulsive.
Okay.
And if I get started on a project, I can't stop until I reach the end. So use every bit of persistence in you. If you don't have persistence in you, you're just going to have to go to work for somebody else. You're not going to be able to have your own business. You need that. I'm an atheist, but you need that God-given persistence. It's either in you or it's not.
Okay. Okay. Well, thank you so much. Did you have any questions for me before we go?
I just, you're in, where are you in again? I forgot.
New Jersey.
You're in New Jersey. That's right. You're right near me.
Yes.
And I'm in Brooklyn, New York.
Yes.
So what are the businesses that you're founding?
You said the businesses that I founded?
Right.
Yes.
That you're working on right now.
Yeah. So it's the Business Shower events.
Right.
Well, the Business Shower events and the Business Shower podcast. And then I have HE Property Investments, which is
that's right. That's
the real
right.
estate company. Yes. So
right.
Those are the two businesses that I founded. Well, actually, me and my husband founded them together. And
right.
But I'm the face of the podcast and everything.
Right.
Like that. Yeah.
Right. Well, real estate is I've survived because of real estate. I knew there's a little story. It's been said that fighter pilots, the stress of dog fighting in the sky is so intense that a fighter pilot can only stay in the air for a couple of weeks and then needs about 6 weeks of rest and relaxation so he won't burn out. And running my own company, the Howard Bloom Organization, was like being a fighter pilot. But I never had days off. I worked 7 days a week under incredibly intense stress. And I knew that sometime in my 40s, my body would just not do this anymore. It would give out. And I was going to have to find some way of making an income that didn't involve work because I'd be incapable of work. And so the business that I chose was real estate. And I had a very simple rule. You don't buy something unless it's going to pay for itself. Unless you don't have to put any money into maintenance, because it's going to pay its own maintenance. If you want to upgrade, that's a different story. And we worked according to that rule, and we bought 3 buildings. And then my wife, and then I got sick in 1988, incredibly sick. And for 5 years, I was too weak to talk and too weak to have another person in the room with me. And I had 2 computers set up next to the bed, and I fashioned an entirely new, I became a whole new me online, because online was the only place I could do anything. But my building sustained me, and my building sustains me today. And once upon a time, Richard Foreman, who's a MacArthur Genius Award winner and is considered the god of avant-garde theater, he's a huge fan of my work. And the 2 of us were doing an event at the Strand bookstore. And he said, why is it that so many people in the creative arts rely on real estate? And I couldn't answer that question. But you need the freedom to live to give you the freedom to do the things that your soul demands of you.
Exactly.
And those things are not necessarily going to produce a payoff in your lifetime. You just have to hope they will produce a payoff at some point, because you're doing them on behalf of your fellow human beings, whether you get paid or not. And to have that freedom, you need something else that's going to pay for your food and housing every week.
Yes.
And real estate is a very good thing.
It is. It is. Well, again, thank you so much.
Kelly, thank you too.
Allowing me to interview you. So do you want to tell our listeners where they can connect with you online?
Yes, go to howardbloom.net, or simply, and it's BLOOM, 2 O's, or simply go to Amazon, look up Howard Bloom, and you'll find my 7 books. And if you're interested in business, then get a copy of The Genius of the Beast, A Radical Revision of Capitalism, and also read Einstein, Michael Jackson, and Me, A Search for Soul, and The Power Pits of Rock and Roll.
Yes. All right, everybody. Well, that is a wrap for this episode. Thank you for listening, and bye.